Welcome to the Milk the Cow podcast. This week, we're going to be talking about further adventures in the dystopia. That's probably the best way of putting it. Some of the stuff that you'll hear today with our guest will probably blow your mind. And I've actually checked this morning, the day after it's happened. And even supposed left-wing newspaper, The Guardian, isn't covering this, but they're covering something about the Brownies IT system. So when we found out about this one, we were told the mainstream media probably won't cover this, so obviously we'll hop straight on it. You do know Alice, my good friend. Alice, how are you doing?
I'm all right, thank you. Yourself?
I'm all right, mate. I just sort of staring down the barrel of hard dystopia again, but that seems to be a daily occurrence.
Yeah.
Which is hence why we decided to do this one with 24 hours notice, because it's important there.
Yeah, definitely.
So just a quick sort of backstory. We've got James coming on. He's a protester. He's just got out of HMP Belmarsh. He's got a tag on his leg, and he's going to inform us about the policing and crime bill, and so obviously the general protest movement, Just Stop Oil as well. So without any further ado, James, how are you doing?
I'm not too bad, Mike. Thanks for having me.
I really appreciate you sparing with the time. It was such short notice. Alice, if I could invite you to start us off, and we'll go back and forth from there. All right, mate?
Yeah. Okay. So, hi, James. So we saw that in the news a while back about there was talk about injunctions potentially being served on climate change protesters. Not really much since then. What even people like myself, I don't think realised was that they actually are already being served. So can you just tell us about what these injunctions actually are and how they work?
Sure. Basically, they're a means for the state to criminalize protests that otherwise would be legal. It's a means for private companies to essentially circumvent the rule of law and ensure that we don't receive a trial by a jury of our peers. And the reason for that is generally because a lot of the times whenever things go to court and end up in a Crown Court to do with the climate, a lot of the time the jury finds in the favor of the defendants, and the state doesn't like that very much. So hence these injunctions.
Yeah. Okay. So I think for anybody watching who's kind of not sure about that, so we do have criminal law and private law in this country. So I think the injunctions are a form of private law where I think the determination of guilt is different, isn't it, than what it is in criminal law. So you don't have a jury or anything like that. So what does it look like when you actually go to court? Who is there?
So, we actually had some protesters yesterday. 10 stood outside an oil terminal in Kingsbury. And literally the state of the injunction is that if you stand anywhere near it, even with just a placard, that's enough. That can potentially land you 2 years in prison and an unlimited fine. And we had 10 arrested yesterday. They're currently held on remand as we speak. We had 16 taken the day before for the same thing. And so when that ends up in court, largely you are going up against just a judge. And we saw this with the Insulate Britain protesters, where 9 were sent to prison. And basically it was found that the judge had links to the fossil fuel industry and all of these sorts of shady dealings. But because they managed to circumvent any sort of trial by jury, they were sentenced to a custodial sentence.
Right. Okay. And how long have they been sentenced?
They were sentenced up to 6 months. It was between 2 months and 6 months, I believe.
James, you're connected with the Just Stop Oil group, who's obviously got a bit of traction in the mainstream media. People will probably know them from what was the Newcastle Arsenal game? Is that right? There's a guy who attached himself to the post.
Yeah, that's my housemate.
Is it? Tell him well done. And also, I did grow up being a Newcastle fan, and I thought it was absolutely hilarious.
Yeah,
we don't really support the club now. It's just an aside. I support a non-league club called Gateshead, but. Well done.
There's lots of screaming in my house about
that. Because Everton won in extra time, granted to them by that incident, he was almost give it a bit of a hero's welcome by some groups, but I don't think he can ever set foot in Newcastle again.
Yeah,
It's all right. I'm the self-appointed king of Newcastle. I'll give him a free pass. No, I think there's a lot of people that they were really appreciative of it from the area, but obviously football's a strong drug. So it's like, what's he doing? Why is he here? There was a lot of that. I'm sure you saw that yourself.
Yeah.
So do you want to tell us a little bit about Just Stop Oil? Like, what is it, how it was formed, and what the aims are?
For sure, yeah. Just Stop Oil is basically a coalition of different groups that have coalesced around a very simple demand, which is no new oil infrastructure and no new oil developments. Which at the moment the government is ploughing ahead with 42 new oil developments in the North Sea, which is somewhat counter to some of their proclamations that they made at COP26 about being leaders on the climate. So we have stepped into civil resistance effectively. History shown time and again that the most effective means of bringing about the kind of societal shift that we need to see and the sort of time frame that we have left is through civil resistance. So that's what we're doing basically.
Great stuff. So for people who don't know what civil resistance is that the same as direct action?
Effectively, yeah. I mean, it's all part of the same sort of sphere of things, basically. But yeah, we're effectively putting our, rather than sort of trying to draw attention to particular issues, we're putting our bodies in the way of the thing that's destroying all of our futures, basically.
Of course, yeah. So, I mean, in terms of destroying all of our futures, what is it? Because as we said at the start, we don't assume knowledge. So what is it in particular that's destroying our futures?
For sure. Yeah. So the IPCC, which is the Independent Panel on Climate Change, the International Energy Agency, they're all saying that we need to halt fossil fuel development at this point. And they said that last year. There can be no new investment in oil infrastructure. This is in line in tight. I mean, at the present time, we're seeing the breakdown of a livable climate. You know, we had Germany underwater recently. We had the London underwater. We had 122 mile an hour winds not that long back. Like even a week ago, the Arctic was 30 degrees above the normal average, and the Antarctic was 40 degrees above the normal average. It was 49 degrees in British Columbia last year, and that's supposed to have a top temperature of around 16 degrees. So everywhere we look, we're seeing the breakdown of the livable climate, and we're seeing the interruption of the Arctic weather patterns. And when that happens, you get weather blocking. That basically means that you have extreme periods of weather, extreme heat followed by extreme wet, followed by extreme cold, and that makes the cultivation of crops extremely difficult. And when crops are difficult to cultivate, we don't eat, basically, and that's when we're looking at societal collapse.
Got you. Alice?
Yeah, no, absolutely. When these things are reported in mainstream media, so say we just like not heard about some of it coming up, but when we do see it, I think one of the things is that, you know, we often talk about how like journalism is dead just because of the extraordinary amount of bias that you see. And one of the things I've seen with, you know, climate change activists is like a real sort of hatchet job on them. Like, you know, it's like, oh, they're blocking roads, they're stopping ordinary people getting to work, they're going to get you in trouble. And, you know, obviously we do see kind of tensions rising there between, you know, between protesters and the general public. Yeah. What I'm hearing about some of these more recent protests, actually, you haven't been blocking public roads at all. You've been, you know, kind of targeting, you know, a lot of the businesses and things like that. How hopeful are you that kind of the message you're trying to put across will do so when, you know, when the mainstream media is effectively just either making up lies or giving a very distorted view about what you're doing and what you're about?
It's really tough. Yeah. I mean, as you're probably aware, 5 billionaires own 80% of UK media, and you can guess what they have investments in. So, you know, there is a vested interest in manipulating the public consciousness, and the constant message is placation. There's nothing to worry about. don't think about too much, go back to shopping. That's sort of generally the vibe that they're going for. And yeah, as you alluded to, we don't want to be disrupting the general public. However, the problem is that if you don't disrupt the general public, you don't get coverage. Like, the media is only going to cover you if they can completely vilify you. And even with our blockades that we carried out over throughout April, we had a major battle on our hands actually getting onto the front page of the newspapers. It took us it was about day 10 before we got onto the front page of the Daily Mail and got onto Good Morning Britain and managed to get that dialogue going. Because I mean, a lot of people sort of probably don't, they'll question our methods in the sense that you're turning people away from the cause, you need to bring people along with you. History's shown actually that you don't necessarily need to do that. What we're actually looking for is that polarization, and it's in that conflict that's where the conversations start to happen, and that's where you start to see the changes happen.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Mike, have you got?
Yeah, sure, I do. So the question I've got is protest now illegal in the UK? Because there's been people who I've seen tweet to that effect. In your opinion, is that the case?
It's certainly heading in that direction, yeah. I mean, as we've seen, the policing crime sentencing bill has now been passed by the Lords. I think it's just waiting royal assent at the moment, which
that's right, yeah.
outlaws noisy protests. So yeah, I mean, it's certainly pretty draconian direction. However, I mean, in many ways, it's not really a surprise. It's indicative of actually the success of protest movement since 2019. XR successfully managed to get the government to declare a climate emergency, and the efficacy of Black Lives Matter was highly effective. So the state is threatened. That's the reality of it. And ultimately, a lot of what we're involved in here is a kind of state of moral and political jujitsu. It's a case of forcing the state to overstep, and it's in that overstep that you get a backlash effect. So effectively, it's obviously not a good thing that bill's going through, but it reveals the true nature of the state, and I mean, we've got a battle on our hands, that's for sure.
Yeah, I love moral and political jiu-jitsu as an analogy for this, and I would love to put Boris Johnson in a Darth choke. It's one of my favourites. Not to kill him, of course, if any spooks are watching. Just to the point of death. No, I don't mean that. Jesus Christ, what am I even saying? We live in a dystopia now. I need to shut up, man.
Yeah.
Pick your battles. Anyway, Alice, what you got for it?
Yeah, I mean, when I've been looking at, you see a real mix in the comment sections, don't you? And even the conversations I've had with other people really supportive of, of what you guys are doing, others not so much, others kind of on the fence thing, which you kind of spoke about before, of saying, oh, well, you need to get public support. But with the injunctions, there's been lots of people going, oh, yes, we need them. We need to stop them doing this. What would you say to people, who are talking about that? Because really, are these injunctions, are they just something that activists should be worried about?
I think we should all be worried about. The fact of the matter is, even if it's not an issue that you agree with, if you give an inch on these sorts of things, then eventually they're going to come for you on an issue that you do care about. So, we have to protect freedom of speech and freedom to protest, regardless of what the issue is, frankly. So yeah, we should all be very scared. I mean, the thing is, people assume that this is just that we've just randomly sort of done this. A lot of thought goes into this sort of thing. People have studied the mechanisms of civil resistance for decades, and effectively, what we do is study the points in history where everything's changed all of a sudden. And there's countless examples of this throughout history. It happened with the Soviet Union, for instance, and it's. What we attempt to do is then engineer these points where you can potentially get these unpredictable flashpoints of like conflict, and then all of a sudden things can change. We saw a little bit of that with the say the Insulate Britain campaign. I don't know if you guys all saw the Growing Concrete clip that went viral when Cameron, one of the spokespeople, was speaking to someone on talk radio.
That's I didn't see that. No.
Oh, yeah.
I did see that. I did when he was talking about like, oh, wood isn't a sustainable. Yeah. Wood doesn't grow. Yeah.
No, yeah, I've seen it.
If you haven't seen it, have a look on YouTube. It's hilarious. But that's an example of like totally unpredictable thing where you can potentially mobilize a lot of people off something, and that's effectively what we're doing, just creating this uncertainty where some change could potentially happen.
So almost like the Situationists. Are you taking like a nod from the 1968 Paris riots and that kind of thing, where you create a situation, have everybody respond to it, and then it kind of creates a new situation? Is that?
Yes, effectively, yeah. I mean, we go back and study all of the sort of social movements throughout history, and sort of sort of take from the best really about what is going to stand the best chance of bringing about the kind of societal shift that we need to see.
That's magic, man. You mentioned free speech, James. Obviously, there's a bit in the news at the minute about free speech absolutism, Elon Musk, all of that. I don't want to talk about Musk really, but that's the sort of point of the next question. Like, where do you stand with free speech? Because I do see a lot of bad faith arguments online that the left is completely anti-free speech, and then you mentioned that free speech for all. So, what's your comfort level with that?
I mean, yeah, I personally, obviously, this is my sort of personal view, but free speech is fundamental to a functioning democracy, and the problem that we have as a culture is we've become so compartmentalized from each other. We need to be able to speak to each other. We need to be able to talk about these difficult issues, or we're never going to get anywhere. But it's so polarized right now, and yeah, as you said, there is a lot of absolutism, and I don't have an easy solution, really. I certainly don't think the social media algorithms are helping us a lot with this, but we need to learn to speak to each other.
I agree, and I mean, it's really refreshing to hear you say that, because I think we went through a moment over the last sort of 10 years, for the majority of it, where people were like, talk to nobody who doesn't agree with you. There was a bit of that. I don't think in reality everybody followed that, but that was the big noise, like cancel and whatever. So it's nice to see that people are like, just thinking the way I think, which is I want to have a dialogue with people. Now, I have my boundary is if they take the piss, it's personal or whatever, then it's a different thing. It's Darth choke time. But if they're not, then I'm going to have that dialogue, because, I mean, I grew up in a working class environment in the northeast of England. Some of the people I grew up with don't share the same politics. So I'm always trying to have a dialogue and discussion, and I think probably vice versa. And I think that's quite helpful if it's born from respect.
Yeah.
So I mean, I would have political opponents on. I would have that discussion, and if they took the piss, then they'd get that kind of energy back. I really just think we've lost our way a little bit, and you're quite right. To fix this, we need to take people with us. The
reality is that there's more the average working person around the world has in common with each other than we do with the ruling class.
Yeah.
And currently, our ruling class are subsidizing the oil industry, £236 million a week of our money, taxpayers' money. And this is while the NHS is falling apart. This is while people can't, feed their kids, why they can't heat their homes, while there's a cost of living crisis. It's a complete outrage. We know
that on the side of a bus.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, we know who these fuckers work for, and it's not you or me. And we need that. We need that awareness to grow, and we need that solidarity between these sort of polarized groups, because ultimately, I think the whole left-right political paradigm is breaking down somewhat.
Yeah.
It's establishment versus anti-establishment that we need to be thinking about at this point.
Oh man, this is so refreshing. I'm really pleased to hear you saying all this. Seriously, before we came on this morning, I was like, for God's sake, man, like what's going on? Like let's hear what James got to say. And I'm actually like feeling like buzzing, listening to you and thinking, right, we can still do this. We can still change this. So thank you, seriously.
We did a live stream about the whole Elon Musk and the free speech, because everybody was talking about that. Oh, he's going to bring free speech back to Twitter, and there was this big conversation about free speech and what it is. When all the time, when actually, these bills are kind of being passed, like right, and there's been quite a few that have gone through, just yesterday. And I think that's what's really terrifying. It's like the entire, we've all been kind of, ourselves included, we're kind of talking about the whole, Twitter thing. And it's actually, this stuff is got real massive implications for absolutely all of us.
Mm-hmm.
can you tell us a little bit about you were arrested yourself recently on there? Can you tell us about what happened there and what's gone on since then?
For sure, yeah. Yeah, that was that. What landed me the stint in Belmarsh was I took part in an occupation of a fuel terminal in Grays in Essex for about 40 hours. We basically we went 40 people went over the fence, and we climbed into the fuel loading bays and basically occupied the pipework above there. It was horrendously dangerous, not very pleasant. It's the worst night I've ever had, suspended on 4 pipes at 3 stories high. But it's as a result of that, I ended up being remanded. I spent 5 days in solitary confinement and then was taken to Belmarsh prison. I only found out I was going to Belmarsh on the prison transport. And I ironically enough, I'd watched a documentary in the run up to all of this on surviving prisons, and it was Britain's Worst Prison, and it was on Belmarsh. So I was like, this is not going to be fun, and it wasn't. But ultimately, if it goes some small way to revealing the criminal hypocrisy of our government, then it's a small price to pay. Ultimately, every peaceful climate activist in prison really reveals the true intentions of our government, and the fact that they don't give a rat's ass about dealing with this crisis. They have zero intention about it. They care more about enriching themselves and their buddies in the oil industry, and fuck everyone else, basically.
Yeah, I mean, Jesus Christ, it's bandied around a lot, but you're a definite hero as far as I'm concerned.
Oh,
I mean, the positive attitude that you still maintain after what you've been through, man, fucking fair play to you.
Well, I wish the Daily Mail thought that way, but
fuck them. Like we don't give no countenance to people who literally supported Hitler. So
yeah, the hurrah the black shirts and all of that. That was like their little headline, wasn't it?
It was.
I mean, there is a definite change in how kind of protesters and activists are being treated. I mean, me and Mike have talked about this before. We've done and been arrested for really similar stuff before, but a very long time ago. At no point, I think, when I was arrested, did it occur to me. I mean, I think I spent a few hours in the cells. I was bored shitless. Without that, I came out with a caution. That was the end of it. At no point did I think like I'm going to end up in prison for this. And these aren't violent offences. These aren't, and people who are committing crimes against the environment are not being touched. In fact, they tend to have positions of power within our society. I think I think no matter what people's stance is, on climate change, I mean, we shouldn't be at the point where we're denying that now. I think unfortunately there are some people who are there, but I think people hearing that cannot see, should be able to see that is not proportionate. I've worked a lot like on the adjacent to not within the criminal justice system, but adjacent to it, which has involved me going to court a lot. I've seen people walk away with absolutely nothing for really, really serious and repeated violent offences. It does not make sense to me that they're sending people to prison for the kind of stuff that you're talking about.
Well, I mean, for me, it makes sense to the level like that they want to show the people who got up a height about that. The Land Rover, that woman who like run somebody over, and they were really putting her up as some kind of hero or something, the press. They need to play it at their base, so they're obviously putting people like you in the nick. So Belmarsh, right? I'm intrigued, right? Did you end up on the Julian Assange wing?
I wish I'd known he was there when I was there. Look, I obviously Wikipedia Belmarsh after the fact, and I was like, oh, Julian was there. Like,
yeah. I just don't know. Obviously, I've never been, so I don't know how it works. What?
But I mean, having sort of had a brief taste of that whole place. I mean, I just feel sorry for everybody there. They're all victims of a failed system. Ultimately, there were 3 lads came in with me. They couldn't have been older than 20, and they were in for drug offences. And I was just like, how is this going to rehabilitate them or even, I mean, I don't know what the offences were, but do they even need rehabilitating? The drug issue is a public health issue. It's not a criminal issue. But the thing is, all of it just reveals where real power lies ultimately. You know, the government are the middle managers that work for a subset of psychopath billionaires, basically. And you know, you go booping real power against the nose, they're going to come for you.
Sure. I mean, do you think there'll be a significant uptick in surveillance, not just towards you, but obviously the group, but like in light of the laws being passed ahead of royal assent? Do you think the police will have their tails up and start coming after people a bit more?
Undoubtedly, yeah. I mean, it's something we should all be very fearful of, particularly like the facial recognition stuff and all this. I mean, it's not a good direction that we're heading in ultimately, and I don't have an easy solution. I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. It's sad to see, but I don't know. I don't know what we do.
I mean, that's the. I mean, we're sort of coming to a close with this, and what we tend to try and focus on is solutions. But is there any sort of crumbs we can hold on to until we work this out? Like, what can we say to people like today who are watching this and listening to this?
I'd say the best hope that we have is to step into civil resistance. You know, history's shown time and time again that this is the most effective way. And I know it's very uncomfortable for people, and people go like, oh, there's no way I could do that. You'd be surprised what you can do if you've got the right support around you. And you know, not to sort of like call for the revolution or anything, but you know, we have some Zoom meetings that are running every Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday at 7 p.m. Have a look at the Just Stop Oil website, sign up for civil resistance, and we can see you on the streets and hopefully do something about this and avert the pretty dire trajectory that we're on.
How do you sit here like this positive with a tag on your leg? Tell us what happens in there, because the smile on your face, it's just like, right, this is me, this is what I'm doing. You seem to very much know who you are. And I know people 3 times your age who have not got that cognitive ability. How do you do that?
Well, I mean, it was to be expected, really. You know, I sort of, you don't go into this sort of thing without realizing that there's going to be serious consequences for it. And ultimately, this is not, you know, this is not a popularity contest. It's not a thing that we expect to be hated for this, like that. But the reality is that being hated doesn't necessarily result in us in failure. You know, the civil rights movement and the suffragettes were the most unpopular people on earth at the time, but now we look back at them and go, oh, well, they had the right idea. So, you know, it's, I don't know. I think ultimately what I'd recommend to anyone dealing with the collapse of civilization and the sort of dystopia that we find ourselves in is, I don't know, take a mindfulness routine, do some meditation or something, and eat well and surround yourself with good people. Really, that's all we can do.
I will certainly do that, and I want to just thank you, as I say, from a personal perspective, because I felt pretty dark before I started speaking to you today about it all, and I don't now. So
can I just ask as well, though? I think this is the one things that really terrifies me is how can we better support people who are being sent to prison? This is an issue that kind of is really sort of strong with me. I've had lots of family members, you know, who've ended up in prison for various offences, much like the 2 lads, you know, that you were talking about before. And this is why I get really frightened when I hear about people going to prison for things like this, because I've seen the knock-on effects that's then had throughout their lives, and about what, you know, and I think you've given some really helpful sort of advice for people there. Is there anything that the rest of us can do to support people who are being sent to prison, basically? Because I think that's really important to form a community around them.
As uncomfortable as it is, the best thing that you can do is step up and take their place, because ultimately everyone that's involved in this fight to save the climate, you know, we're all going to end up in prison eventually, and you know, each one of us that ends up in prison, we need 10 others to step into place and say no, because ultimately that's the best defense that we have. The state is well aware of the backfiring effect. For example, when the 9 people who went to prison for the Insulate Britain thing last year, when that happened, 2,000 people came out on the streets and marched and broke the same injunction, and 124 people got arrested for breaking the same injunction that sent them to prison. That's the backfiring effect. So if we can propagate that, then we stand a chance of saving this thing. But if people unfortunately, if people are too, you know, don't want to sort of step into that situation. And I appreciate not everybody can. It's a privilege to be able to sort of take those kind of risks. Like not everybody is in that position. And failing that, if you can't do that, then obviously, send letters of support and get involved in other ways. Because one sort of brief calculation I made a while back in terms of like people getting involved in actions and stuff is it takes 9 non-arrestables each per arrest to facilitate that. So there's avenues for getting involved in all of this sort of stuff at every kind of level, and implore everyone to do so, because at the moment our home's on fire, and if we don't do something about it, we're completely fucked. So
and that's like absolute fact too. I've recently done an interview with an ecologist, and he basically lays it out bare and does it in a really simple way. So that'll be like following yours. Just on this, we're going to try and get this out immediately. Yeah. So we've done my 30 minutes. James, honestly, thank you so much for your time, but also everything that you're doing. You're an inspiration and a hero. And I don't bandy that crap around lightly, but for me, that's what I see as an inspirational hero. So thank you.
Oh, Mike, thank you. And Alice, thank you so much. No, I mean, ultimately what you guys are doing is so important, is that we need to create a whole new media ecosystem, because, these ideas need to get out there, and like it requires people like you to go and get this into people's heads and stuff. So like, thank you for all the work you're
very doing. Much appreciated, man. And just another quick plug there, go to juststopoil.org to find out more about these good people and maybe get involved. Thanks, James. All the best, mate.
Thank you.
And thank you, Alice, as ever. All the best.
Thank you. See you again.
Our closing titles. Goodbye.